Hey, welcome back to How We Got Here. If you're new, hit subscribe, because after this video, you'll never think about the language you're hearing right now the same way again. Right now, roughly 1.5 billion people on Earth speak English. But here's the strange part. Only about 400 million of them grew up speaking it. The rest, over 1 billion people, learned English as a second language. They chose to learn it. Or, more accurately, the world gave them no choice. English is the language of international business, science, aviation, diplomacy, the internet, and pop culture. It's the official or dominant language in 75 countries and territories. Job postings from Tokyo to Berlin to Lagos list English fluency as a requirement. If you want to publish a scientific paper, you write it in English. If you want to make a hit song, you sing it in English. If you want to close an international deal, you negotiate it in English. But why? English isn't the easiest language to learn. Its spelling is a nightmare. Its pronunciation makes no sense. It has more exceptions than rules. Mandarin Chinese has more native speakers. Spanish is spoken across more countries. So why English? The answer has nothing to do with the language itself. It has everything to do with power, money, and two empires that dominated the world back to back at exactly the right moments in history. Let's start at the beginning. In the 5th century, 3 Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, invaded the British Isles. They brought their language with them, and over time it evolved into what we call Old English. If you heard it today, you wouldn't understand a word. It sounded more like German than anything you'd recognize. For centuries, English was a small, regional language spoken on a rainy island off the coast of Europe. Nobody outside Britain cared about it. Latin was the language of the church and scholarship. French was the language of diplomacy and royalty. English was the language of farmers and peasants. In 1066, William the Conqueror invaded England from Normandy, and French became the language of the English court. For nearly 300 years, the ruling class spoke French, while commoners spoke English. The king spoke French, the courts spoke French, the nobility spoke French. English was treated as a peasant tongue, barely worth writing down. This is why English has so many French words today, roughly 45% of its vocabulary. Words like government, justice, parliament, restaurant, and beauty all came from French. There's even a famous quirk that comes from this split. The animals in the field kept their English names, cow, sheep, pig, because peasants raised them. But the meat on the table got French names, beef, mutton, pork, because the French-speaking nobility ate them. The class divide is literally baked into the vocabulary. But English survived. More than survived. It adapted. It absorbed French, Latin, Norse, and Celtic words like a sponge, growing its vocabulary into the largest of any language on Earth. Over 250,000 distinct words and counting. By the 1400s, English had clawed its way back to dominance in England, but it was still just the language of one small, damp island off the coast of Europe. Nobody in Paris, Rome, or Beijing had any reason to learn it. Then something happened that would change the world. The British started building an empire. Beginning in the late 1500s and accelerating through the 1600s and 1700s, Britain began colonizing the world. First North America, then the Caribbean, then India, then Australia, New Zealand, and huge swathes of Africa and Asia. At its peak in the early 1900s, the British Empire was the largest empire in human history. It covered roughly a quarter of the Earth's land surface. Nearly a quarter of the world's population lived under British rule. The sun literally never set on the British Empire, because there was always a British territory somewhere in daylight. And everywhere the British went, they brought English with them. In settler colonies like America, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, English became the dominant language because British settlers outnumbered the indigenous populations. English wasn't just imported. It was planted, watered, and grown until it replaced whatever had been there before. These countries became English-speaking nations from the ground up. In colonies like India, Nigeria, Kenya, and Hong Kong, the approach was different. The British didn't replace local languages entirely. Instead, English became the language of government, law, education, and trade. If you wanted power, education, or economic opportunity, you needed English. A local elite emerged that spoke English, and that elite held on to power long after the British left. This is a crucial point. When these colonies gained independence, most of them kept English as an official language, not because they loved their former colonizers, but because English had become the glue holding together countries with dozens or even hundreds of different ethnic groups and languages. In Nigeria alone, there are over 500 languages. English was the only one everyone could share. So the British Empire planted English on every continent. But empires fall. And when they do, their languages can fade with them. Latin was once the universal language of Europe, the language of law, science, and the church. It's dead now. French was the language of diplomacy and high culture for centuries. Every European court spoke French. International treaties were written in French. It was the English of its day, but it's been eclipsed. Portuguese, Spanish, and Dutch all had vast colonial empires. None of their languages became truly global in the way English has. English should have followed the same path. As the British Empire crumbled in the mid-20th century, the language should have begun its slow retreat, but it didn't. Because just as the British Empire was declining, a new English-speaking power was rising to take its place, and this one was even more powerful. America's rise in the 20th century is what locked English into place as the permanent global language, and the timing was everything. After World War II, the United States emerged as the most powerful economy on Earth. American companies expanded globally. American banks financed the rebuilding of Europe and Asia. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency, and the language of all this economic activity was English. But it wasn't just money, it was culture. And this is where America did something no empire before it had ever done. It made people want to speak its language. Hollywood became the world's movie studio. American films played in theaters from Cairo to Calcutta to Copenhagen. Rock and roll, jazz, blues, disco, hip-hop, all born in America, became the soundtrack of the entire planet. American television shows became global phenomena. Kids in Brazil watched American cartoons. Teenagers in South Korea listened to American music. Families in Egypt watched American sitcoms. Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Nike, Levi's. These brands didn't just sell products, they sold an American lifestyle. And they sold it in English. For the first time in history, a language wasn't just imposed by colonizers. It was desired by consumers. People wanted to understand the movies, sing along to the songs, and read the labels. English went from the language of power to the language of cool. Then came the technology revolution. The internet was born in America, and its language was English. The first websites were in English. The first programming languages were based on English. Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, all American, all English. When the world went online, it went online in English. Today, roughly 60% of all website content is in English. The next closest language is Russian at about 5%. English didn't just dominate the internet, it became the internet. Science followed the same path. After World War II, as American universities became the world's best-funded research institutions, English became the language of scientific publishing. Today, the vast majority of peer-reviewed academic journals publish in English. If you're a scientist in Japan, Brazil, or Germany, and you want your research to reach the widest audience, you publish in English. There's no alternative. International institutions cemented this further. The United Nations, the World Bank, NATO, the International Monetary Fund, all adopted English as a primary working language. International aviation standardized on English. meaning every pilot and air traffic controller in the world communicates in English, regardless of their nationality. So here's the full picture. The British Empire spread English to every continent through colonization. American economic and cultural dominance in the 20th century made it indispensable. Technology and the internet hardwired it into global infrastructure, and international institutions made it official. Each wave reinforced the last. The more people spoke English, the more valuable it became to learn. The more valuable it became, the more people learned it. It's a self-reinforcing cycle that's almost impossible to break. Could another language replace English? In theory, Mandarin Chinese has far more native speakers, but Mandarin is notoriously difficult to learn for non-native speakers. Its writing system alone requires memorizing thousands of characters. And despite China's growing economic power, its cultural exports don't yet match America's global reach. Spanish is growing fast, especially in the Americas, but it lacks the institutional and technological infrastructure that English has built over decades. There's also a fascinating paradox at work. The more dominant English becomes, the harder it is to replace. Every international agreement written in English, every scientific database coded in English, every air traffic control protocol standardized in English creates another layer of infrastructure that would cost billions to rebuild in another language. English isn't just a language anymore. It's an operating system that the entire world runs on. The honest truth is that English is likely locked in as the global language for generations, not because it's the best language, but because it was the language of the right empires at the right time. The British planted it everywhere, and the Americans made sure it stayed. The next time you hear someone in Tokyo, Lagos, or Stockholm speaking English, remember, they're not speaking it because it's easy or beautiful. They're speaking it because a tiny island off the coast of Europe built the largest empire in history, and then its former colony became the most powerful nation on Earth. Two empires, back to back, at the exact moment the world was becoming connected. That's not luck. That's history. And that is how we got here. If you learned something, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what language do you think could challenge English in the future? I read every single one. Hit that like button too, it really helps. Next time, why is housing so expensive everywhere? It's not just your city. It's a global crisis with roots you'd never expect. Notifications on. I'll see you in the next one.